Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the tinyML world. Today we have the September edition of tinyML Success Stories. This is the place where you're going to meet people who really drive this new exciting field of energy efficient machine learning forward. The mavericks, in a way, the masterminds, people who take a lot of risks and really build cool things in the tinyML: companies, products, technologies, collaborations, partnerships, all the great things. And today we are very fortunate to have a special guest, Zach Shelby. He's very well known in this community, and Zach is a co-founder and the current CEO of Edge Impulse. Before we go, it is my pleasure to highlight tinyML strategic partners. Those are the companies who are supportive of what we do in the tinyML Foundation. So they are Analog Devices, Aeon Devices, ARM, DeepLight, Edge Impulse. That's where Zach works. EMSA, Visual Sense, PhotoHub, Greenwave Technologies, Grovity, IBM, Imagimob, ITMIS, Clickatek, Microsoft, Nota AI, NXP, OctoML, Prophecy, Kixo, Qualcomm, Reality AI, Rixen, Renaissance, SAP, Seed, SenseML, Silicon Labs, Sony, ST Microelectronics, Stream Analyze, Synaptics, Synsense, Syntient, and TDK. A couple of announcements. Next week, we are very excited to have tinyML Neuromorphic Engineering Workshop. It is chaired by Professor Charlotte Frankel from Tech University of Delft and the program committee. They put together an excellent program of really top people in the field, both from the academia and from the industry. They will be sharing their vision and their latest and greatest in this field. So I strongly encourage you to join. It's going to start at 8 a.m. Pacific, live as usual. And you see the link there and the QR code where you can register and join. It's going to be really interesting as neuromorphic field evolves. So this will be a virtual event. And then we are even more excited to meet in person in about 3 weeks. We're going to have our second tinyML Europe, Middle East, Africa event. This year, it's going to be in person. It will take place in Cyprus. You see the kind of the beautiful place there on the right. And we have amazing program, great speakers, Massimo Panzi from Adrena and Alberto San Giovanni Vincidelli from UC Berkeley, who is also a co-founder of Cadence and Synopsys. A really great program, great place. Really looking forward to see many of you there. And registration is open. Also go to the website, go to the QR code, and you will be able to go there. The communities are growing very steadily. So we are in the 5-digit numbers now in any kind of dimension. So you can join them in the meetup groups. There are many in 37 countries. The LinkedIn community is over 10,000 people. So yeah, those are the places where you can collaborate and learn about tinyML and share your ideas, your knowledge there. This video today will be recorded as usual, and it will be on YouTube channel, which also keeps growing in terms of number of great videos and subscribers. So you can subscribe there too. And again, this video will be posted there by tomorrow. And at this point, it is my privilege to introduce Chris Rowen, the host of tinyML series. Although Chris doesn't really need to be introduced to this community, he is super well known in the high-tech world and in the Bay Area entrepreneurship world as a technologist, as a passionate entrepreneur in this area. Currently, Chris is with Cisco as VP of Engineering, responsible for machine learning there. And before that, he co-founded and led Bubble Labs. That was a speech ML company that was acquired by Cisco. And Chris has a lot of history before Bubble Labs, obviously, as the CTO of Cadence, and also co-founder of Tensilica. Chris has tons of professional recognition from IEEE and other organizations, professional organizations, and he has a background in physics from Harvard and EE from Stanford. So Chris, thank you again for driving this, and the stage is yours.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a particular pleasure to welcome Zach Shelby. I always think of this series as really working at the convergence of three big topics. Where's the technology going? What are the market opportunities around tinyML? And how do entrepreneurs wrestle with the opportunity and massive hurdles to go create new value in new companies? And Zach really represents all of those as a driving technologist, as uniquely insightful about what's going on in the markets, and as an example of an extremely successful entrepreneurial history. He is an entrepreneur, an angel investor, a technologist who has been working in embedded and machine learning for quite some time. He was a VP at ARM. He was co-founder and CEO of Microbit Foundation and Sensinode. And he really has been the driving force to bring ML to a broad range of edge devices as co-founder and CEO of Edge Impulse. So welcome, Zach.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning.
Good morning. So, maybe the place to start is a little bit of history. What is the story arc for you, and how did that lead to the founding and development of Edge Impulse?
Well, I've always been really fascinated by the invisible computer. So I grew up in the generation of the Commodore 64. And recently, I was lucky to go visit the Computer History Museum together with Simon Segars. And we sat and had a conversation like this in front of the Commodore 64 and the BBC Micro display. A little bit of a tussle between Commodore 64 and the BBC Micro, which was better. We know the answer, Chris. It was the Commodore 64, of course. But that got me started on a kind of journey of compute as this amazing tool where you can innovate. And in those days, right, you started on the Commodore 64 creating your own code. Because it didn't come with games. You really had to create them. And I think that planted something in my mind that's what compute's about, right? Compute is about creating things, creating tools that you need to solve problems. It isn't about just getting some video game that you buy from somebody and then you're playing it as a consumer. It's about creation. And so that followed me as a young engineer. I got really, really, really inspired and interested in, well, what else can we do with this compute, right? It's not just about personal computers on your desk. It's not just about mainframes. What about industries, right? What happens if we bring compute into these really interesting places like industrial control and healthcare, space and space exploration? And that kind of got me started on my career, putting the internet together with embedded systems. That's how I started out as an engineer, one of the first people bringing low power wireless technology, mesh networks, Bluetooth Low Energy. I got a chance to work on as an engineer back in the early 2000s, and really kind of helped create what we now know as the Internet of Things. But back then it wasn't so obvious, right? There were these really proprietary control buses, and that's what you used to communicate with all these devices. You didn't use the internet or anything like it. So we had a really simple vision in our head, right? If we combine this embedded compute, which is getting more and more powerful, and we combine this stack of internet technologies, we can really open up innovation for people in these embedded devices. But, and this is where I have a but, And I think a lot of entrepreneurs start out this way. I wasn't an entrepreneur by default. I was a research scientist. So I was doing my PhD, doing research at the university in Finland, was where I was based. And I got frustrated. So I actually got to the point where we'd done all this work, right? All the academic work. We implemented all the protocol stacks with all the new mesh technologies. We implemented very low power IPv6, what we now know as 6LoWPAN. We did all that work and kind of showed the industry and the world that this all is great, right? Let's go do it. Let's go ship this stuff to everybody. And nothing happened. My end result that, back 2005, 2006 was nobody's using the technology. Like, what's going on? And I'm sure many of you listening that come from our tinyML space have probably felt the same at some point in your career, right? If you've been doing
this
research.
Is so great. What's wrong with those people out there?
Yeah, why isn't everybody using this? It's done, right? Like, we did all the research. Look at the numbers. The graph is amazing, right? This is the technology innovators dilemma, right? And we had that. I went through a technology innovator crisis back in 2005, and I literally kind of at some point I remember just going, you know what? Screw you, world. I'm going to quit my PhD. I actually quit my PhD in the last year of my PhD. I still have not finished that. Took a couple buddies that were coding with me, all this protocol stuff on embedded. And we said, you know what? We're going to go create a company that's just going to give this stuff away until at some point they're just going to use it. And that's how I ended up getting involved in my first startup as a co-founder and CTO. By just pure frustration. If they're not going to do it, we're going to do it. So we founded SensiNode, one of the first IoT companies in the world, really around a vision of, well, we're going to bring the internet to these industrial embedded wireless control systems. And through that, right, we're going to enable innovation. Because if we give those tools to people, to engineers, they'll be able to create things in a much more open, much more rapid, innovative way, right? Which is what the internet did, right? We were able to allow people to create lots of new internet services very quickly and independently of each other. HTTP, of course, and web browsers opened that up even more, where now you could just create any kind of web page you wanted by anybody with anything on it, accessible by anybody in the world. That was an amazing, mind-blowing thing that wasn't dependent on one vendor. So the other thing I learned from this is this ability for a multi-vendor environment, a multi-innovative environment to happen was really, really important back in those days. So that's how I got started on my journey. And of course, the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur, I learned a lot about mostly what not to do and a bunch of things about what works. But I think what you really learn is all the things you shouldn't do and don't work through that experience. That company was acquired by ARM in 2013, and that's how I ended up in the Valley and working for ARM as a vice president on IoT and then later on machine learning.
Right. One of the big questions that comes up in any strategy, and most emphatically in this IoT strategy, is how do you decide how horizontal or vertical to be? Are you going to build an underlying technology which will empower millions of different applications, or do you find the one killer app that really changes the world and which creates a lot of value, or some mix or hybrid or compromise in between? How have you navigated that question of horizontal and vertical and enabling or solving as a strategy, particularly with Edge Impulse? But maybe part of it is the evolution of how you figured out where the right place to be as, at least for your effort.
Yeah, I think it's like the $1 million question for all entrepreneurs of all kinds, right? Not just startup entrepreneurs, but even traditional people starting businesses. This question of how vertical do you go versus being a horizontal thing that many, many, many people can use, and when? So there's also, Chris, a timing question here that I've become more sensitive to over time. With my SensiNode days, we were actually forced to go vertical very quickly. And the reason was that there was no market. We started in IoT in 2005. Well, IoT didn't become a market until 2010, 11, 12, 13, right? We were way early, like 5 years too early. And that was a painful thing to do, but it also kind of gave us freedom to say, well, we're just going to create this technology, right? And everybody's going to come. and use it. And for us, it was IPv6. It was 6LoWPAN. We were the very low power IPv6 wireless mesh people. But nobody really knew what that was about. Why would you need that? How could you use it? It was a completely ununderstood thing. So we were forced very quickly through this kind of arc of our VCs telling us that, well, you need to make some money, to go and go after the first industries that we saw needing this. And for us, it was things like industrial street lighting and industrial like remote control. So outdoor remote assets, electric meters, pumps you're measuring, things like that. And so we found a little niche with some verticals that really worked for the technology. And then we kind of flipped our whole thing on, well, hey, we can help you solve this problem. Here's all the stuff you need: some cloud widgets, middleware, some application UIs, some protocol stacks on devices. We just kind of put together everything needed. And later I learned that that's also called crossing the chasm. This important stage in a company's like kind of a market's arc of development, where at the right time in a market, you've got to have the right strategy to go take advantage of it. And in an early adopter market, you need to be able to latch onto a niche with a clear enough application that's a vertical that can understand what you're doing and what's the value, and that you can repeatably serve, right? You can sell them the same product, not customized in a million ways and paid with NRE. But you can literally sell them the same product to more than one person, right? Yeah, several times. And you need that momentum to get across the chasm. And the chasm is early adopters going into a mature market where people see this more broadly as a thing, right? They know what to call it. They know they need a budget. So there's this market chasm crossing that we kind of this is just by force of survival. I was not able to articulate this back in those days, but by just pure will of survival as entrepreneurs, we're like, all right, we're going to have to go do this vertical just to make money so that we can eventually make our internet technology, right, for embedded go everywhere. And that is what happened in the end, right? We did a vertical, we got acquired by ARM, and ARM helped us to bring the technology everywhere. We weren't able to do it on our own as a startup. And sometimes that going horizontal might come through being acquired by a company that has the resources to go and democratize what you're doing. And that was also an interesting takeaway, that you don't have to do all of your vision during the period when you're the startup, right? Or you're just doing your thing. That might come later, like through acquisition. Mm-hmm. So I learned a little bit about this in my first startup. Later on, I think I've been smarter about articulating this and understanding where you are in a market. And my view these days is that horizontal plays are interesting. That's in the sense that it's a super risky winner take all proposition. So in a niche, and you want to be in a niche, you can't just go do everything in the world all at once. It's another, I think, Peter Thiel's 0 to 1 is a very, very good kind of roadmap for entrepreneurs. Like, pick something that you can go and realistically go own and change the world through in a time frame and in the resources you have. And in our case, right, the niche is tinyML, right? We're working in the field of tinyML. That's great. We have something that we can really go and solve. And it's not too broad. If we were just going to say, we're going to change all of AI, right, for everybody around the world, that's a bit too much. It's a huge thing to take on. But our space that we work in is quite specialized. That's a good thing. However, when you go and horizontalize and create like what people think of as platforms, right, in these markets, you have to be coming in at the right time in the market. So you have to come in early, but not too early. So you have to be just kind of early adopter stage at the beginning of that. It's the right time to come in with a horizontal play. You have to then verticalize in the early adopter market. So you have to find 1 or 2 vertical applications that bring you through the market. And by the way, right now, the tinyML market is in an early adopter market. It is not a mature market yet. Nobody has product market fit in tinyML. Yeah. We don't either. We're pre-product market fit. So you have to go and be really good at least 1 or 2, if you can, 1 or 2 vertical applications that you can go and really easily explain the value proposition to customers, sell that more than once. And then there's a switch that happens later, right? And this is where companies can go one of two ways. You could say that, wow, this vertical thing is working so well, let's just keep doing this. And that is absolutely okay, right? If you're amazing at a vertical and you can go continue to win that, you can go into product market fit, hit the gas and go, right? You just go and
people
focus on that
often
vertical.
underestimate just how big verticals can be.
Oh God. Yeah, like every single sub vertical that we work in tinyML is $1 billion business, right? Every single one. It's like, it's amazing how much business there is in digital transformation, in AI.
Right.
Or you could take another path, which is when you hit product market fit, you can go back to horizontalization if you have the critical mass to take it all. And so it's a very risky game in the sense that going horizontal requires you to switch modes several times, build out horizontal, go to market vertically, go back horizontal. And I think people underestimate also how much time it takes. So this may take 5 to 10 years. So I see these technology adoption paths as being kind of decade-long things that are happening. Right. And it takes hundreds of millions of dollars to go horizontally, go win a market. Hundreds of millions of dollars.
It's not quite embedded ML, but one of the best examples of that is the story arc of NVIDIA, in the sense that people look now as this horizontal superpower, and they say, "Oh wow, I want to be a horizontal superpower like NVIDIA." And there actually are a fair number of silicon startups that sort of point to NVIDIA as the role model, and they have rallying cries like, "I have more, multiplies
Tops
per watt than NVIDIA by a mile," and think somehow that is going to power them to success horizontally. You have to remember that NVIDIA spent decades wandering in the wilderness. They really focused vertically on 3D rendering, especially game 3D rendering engines, which is really a vertical. And it was only after 15 or 20 years that they could stand up and say, "Oh, let's talk about general purpose compute." And then, "Oh, let's talk about ML." And the contrast between what's really required and what NVIDIA really did, and the stories that people now tell is shocking and misleading in many ways. That really this need to go solve somebody's problem, which often means in the early days of a market, you've got to build everything or nearly everything, from the lowest level software all the way up to the end application that allows it to be deployed by the average Joe who's trying to install an industrial lighting system, and then figure out where you go by adding adjacent verticals, by enabling first a small ecosystem and then a larger ecosystem. It's only then that you really get to start saying the H word, the horizontal word.
I couldn't agree more. And some of the extreme things we've had to do, just as a funny story, right? I recently developed an entire AI-powered camera from scratch. Everything, the entire hardware design with casing, right? Battery power setups for operating for years in the field, because we found a vertical where these types of very low power AI cameras are game changing, yet nobody was creating them. None of the vendors were interested. None of the kind of end people making cameras were wanting to go there yet. We had to go and invest in more of the vertical stack than we ever would have thought we would be doing. And this is something I'm going to be announcing next week at our big event at Imagine. Please welcome people to come and listen in live on YouTube. We're going to be announcing this camera, and we had to go build this exactly for this reason, where in order to make the value obvious for customers and enable the technology to get out there, sometimes you have to go build a lot more than you thought. And you don't have to do it forever. We're not going to sell cameras. We're not a hardware vendor, but we'll find a partner to go take that camera and get it to manufacturing. and and thus go open up that market in ways that might have taken 5 more years, right, if we just wait. So there's also a matter of acceleration sometimes too. You're putting that vertical stack of whatever's needed for the customer, both to make the value for the customer much more obvious, but also to accelerate your market that you're in. And that's something that all of us can do, right? If we're really smart about building out the solution, you can make your market a lot faster by making the, get rid of the barriers for adoption is one way to think about it.
Right. As you've followed this entrepreneur's journey, there surely were times where you hit the wall and you had to pick yourself up and say, gosh, that was unexpected. I got to do something really different because that did not feel good. Can you tell a story about a case where you really, key assumptions were not met and you had to reassess in some fundamental way and go off in a new direction? Business model or technology or end application?
Yeah, I got a couple that are really interesting. So the first one's from my really early days of being an entrepreneur. And I think it just goes to show how important it is to build businesses with a vision, not a technology in mind. Mm-hmm. Your job is to change the world in some way, right? And keep that in your head. For us with SensiNote, our first startup, it was, we believe that these industries will become amazingly innovative if we can bring the internet to them, right? To these embedded systems and these control systems. And we want to make that happen no matter what it takes, right? We weren't actually too stuck on, well, exactly what technology we're going to use to do it. What kind of product are we going to make? We didn't care so much. And what we found is that our first product was completely wrong. So what we did starting out, we were one of the first open source stack companies. We built an open source protocol stack for all of these protocols, security, mesh networking, all these things. So that was an open source IPv6 stack back in 2006, 2007, which was very early for that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then we productized hardware. We actually were a hardware design house where we had a stack of modular, pluggable, embedded system boards. So these days you'd think of it like an Arduino, but this was kind of the early days of the space. That wasn't such a common thing yet. So we had this stack of hardware, and we were selling the hardware, and we were giving away the software IP in practice, right? The software IP was open source. And we did that for a few years, and we were quite successful with it, actually. We had hardware shipping to lots of universities and people doing innovative stuff. We felt pretty good about it. And then we got our venture capitalists involved. We got our first funding round. They believed in our vision. And they basically told us that, okay, guys, you got to start monetizing your software. And we don't care about the hardware. So we had to completely flip our entire business model and the way that we were looking at value from our technology because of the investor environment, actually, that people didn't understand yet that you could do open source software, right? And build a business model around it. And it probably they were right. It was too early for it. So we had to completely flip. We had to start kind of giving away hardware. We made a dev kit that we just kind of gave away as a promotional thing. And then we started charging for the software. And, eventually that even went further, and where we realized that it's not enough to just do embedded software. Oftentimes you need to do some cloud stuff. So we found out that we had to create a whole cloud solution too, that end to end solved the problem around the Internet of Things. Mm-hmm. I never would have seen that coming when we first started, that we'd have to flip these things completely on their heads. The other big thing that I ran into in those days was 2008 financial crisis. Mm-hmm. So we nearly went bankrupt. And this is something that a lot of entrepreneurs won't talk about or tell you about. And I think it's important that we talk about failure too. I think Americans are better at that, at least in Finland. That's a very hard thing to talk about failure. Failure in Finland is like your grandmother will never talk to you again because you failed, and the government will keep you in debt for the rest of your life because there's no personal bankruptcy. That concept doesn't exist. So Finns are very risk averse. Americans have a better, but I think we should talk about it more. So in our case, right, 2008 came, the financial crisis hit. We were late in a funding round raise. So we were actually raising money as a Series A, and we started too late. We did not have enough cash in the bank, right? We had a few months of runway left in our cash, right? In the fall of 2008, you can imagine, remember that timing, right? Fall of 2008, we were doing great. We were a hot startup. People loved technology. We were gonna get this fundraising. The financial crisis hit, and that time it just shut off the money, right? All money faucets just got shut off. VCs, banks, you name it, right? The money was just stopped. And so we were going under, right? We are running out of cash. We have some money coming in from customers. It is not enough. And so we had to go through some really extreme reorganization to be able to survive through that. So literally semi shutting down an entity, laying off staff for a few months, including myself. I was unemployed for a few months back in that time. And then kind of reorganizing it, restarting that with a smaller, very core team, and then continuing on our journey. That's hard, right? When you have to go through a total financial meltdown and then restart again, kind of from scratch. It takes a lot of willpower as an entrepreneur to go do that. So I've now seen it, and what I learned from that is that you need to be ahead of yourself in fundraising, always. So these days, I fundraise one round ahead. So when I start using an example of the way I do this with Impulse, when I started using Series A funding, which was a $15 million round, when I started tapping into Series A money, I had already closed Series B. So I took in a $34 million Series B round right when I was starting to tap into Series A money. So I always have one round ahead in cash. And I might be a little paranoid, maybe through my experience, but I found that to be really healthy, because then you always have several years of runway that you can go execute. And that's a nice thing for your entire team. You can tell them that we are going and executing on this no matter what it takes, right, for the next years, because we've got the funds to do it. So
and there's a powerful self-fulfilling prophecy in that having cash in the bank makes you significantly more potent. There's more bounce in your step, your credibility with customers, your ability to project a sense of being an actor, a game changer, a source of innovation at the business level as well as at the technology level is magnified enormously versus the situation where the company is on its back foot trying to think about cash flow in a very tactical basis.
Fundraising yet again. Fundraising yet again, bridge rounds, those are not fun things to have to deal with.
Yeah. I've always said the right time to fundraise is when you can absolutely prove that you don't need to fundraise.
Exactly. We do not need money. That's the thing that VCs like to hear more than anything else. Yeah. But Chris, there's another interesting side effect of that, and something I've found, maybe just advice for all entrepreneurs, is in order to do that requires massive amount of cash efficiency. So to be able to raise ahead of time, right, and be able to have cash in the bank and keep that cash in the bank, you need to be able to execute very efficiently. And this is kind of the thing I've had to match with that, is you don't waste money. You don't spend money on some grandeur thing that you don't know whether it's going to bring in cash. You have to work with customers early. You have to solve their problems and give them value early. You need to charge them early, right? Bring in real revenue. And then build a team that's efficient, right? Don't waste money. So for example, we don't have offices all around the world and spend a lot of money on that. We're a virtual organization at Impulse. Not out of necessity, but that's part of the thing that makes us efficient. Make sure you're using your cash in a very efficient way. Get something out of it that you can really see that's tangible. And that might be innovation, right? It might be developer traction. It might be ecosystem scale. There's a lot of different things that you can see that come out of money, but do it efficiently, because that allows you to have that power of cash in the bank, and it makes it a lot easier to fundraise. And VCs love to see that, right? They don't really like to see money wasted. It's not a cool thing to say that, oh, we've raised this much money and we've built all this stuff. Yet, if you don't have the traction to show from it, that's actually a warning sign for a lot of VCs. And now when the market changed earlier this year, that's now gone away, right? Cash efficiency is again king. If you can show you can grow efficiently,
right,
that's what VCs want to see.
Well, let's pivot from the abstract to the concrete and talk a little bit about what are the specific markets, what are the specific applications that you think are the most exciting over the next 2 or 3 years? What are the things that you're leaning into or think that the industry needs to be leaning into in order to take tinyML to the next step in its potential?
Yeah, so we started out, the strategy with Edge Impulse is we are a horizontal play in the long term. Mm-hmm. In the short term, we are helping customers put ML in real products. That's our tagline that we think of what our role is. Mm-hmm. Whatever that takes. And we've been exploring 5 or 6 different market segments since early on. We have kind of a matrix, we call it a 5 by 5 of industry verticals and different use cases that we track. So we have this kind of heat map. Mm-hmm. And every year we look at that heat map and go, oh, where's the hot spots? So last year there was like 4 or 5 hotspots that we saw identified that, okay, this is interesting. Let's invest a little bit more energy into those. This year we went and looked at this again because now the market's definitely evolved from last year. We're seeing a lot more activity and action. And we identified 2 use case areas where we're now leaning in very heavily. So the way I think about this and what's happening with the entire Edge ML market is we need to be focused on the health of humans. So digital health, wearable health, sensor health, right? Measuring people to make their health better, mm-hmm. and the health of machines. Predictive maintenance, condition monitoring, right? Machine system monitoring. And these 2 areas have come up with us time and time again, right? We're seeing customers repeatedly come back to us and want to do more and have major problems they're trying to solve where there's a lot of money and value involved, right? There's clear value proposition for them of why they need to help solve these problems. It's not an abstract thing. It's a very, very concrete thing for the customer. And so these are two areas, and I'll just give a few examples, right? We have customers in the human health space that are measuring sleep, right? How people are sleeping. We just had one big project proposal around cognitive fatigue. Very interesting, right? For professionals under extreme duress. How is their cognitive fatigue using cheap sensors, right? What's their risk of falling asleep while they're doing something? What's their risk of injuring themselves, right? Or injuring other people? We're working with a customer on stress detection for consumers, right? So human stress. How is my stress level, right? How is my recovery? That I think is going to be a big deal for people in the future. Their kind of own stress and mental well-being. We have customers in medical devices that are doing like RF scanning of your body tissue, right? So literally doing like spectrometry on an RF level through your body tissue. Just amazing work, and helping them to apply machine learning to make use of those sensors to detect things like glucose in your bloodstream, and other analytes that might be in your body. So did you take your drugs, for example, that you're supposed to take from the doctor? And this list goes on and on. So this is just an amazing market in outpatient recovery, right? So you can go over the top as well. How are patients recovering from surgery? A lot of elderly recovery has problems like this. Is someone active? Are they showing the behaviors that they should be showing if they're recovering? Pharma in pharma use case is amazing. So this is a cluster of ML applications where we're seeing just a real clear value and a lot of repeatability. So we're leaning heavily into that.
The ideal characteristics of a cluster like that is that it will both tell you, well, what are the end use applications that you should be pursuing? What's immediately adjacent and closely related? But it also gives you some hints back down the stack into where do you need to evolve underlying technologies?
Absolutely.
What do you get from this focus on health in terms of how it shifts some of the underlying technology drivers or technology investments you want to make?
Excellent question. So that really is what it's about. Like, this helps drive your roadmap of focus, because you need to be able to sell these people the same product, right? Repeatedly. In the case of health, what we're seeing as a big driving force is the clinical data collection process.
Mm-hmm.
So these health algorithms and health algorithm value are generated from scaling up clinical data collection into data set collection. And those are complicated, right? We're talking about oftentimes cheap sensors, like this is an Oura ring. You may have several Oura rings on you measuring something that you're interested in, together with medical devices. So we're actually involved with EEG measurements. We're involved with ECG measurements, SpO2, glucose sticks, you name it. We've seen most of those. And you're doing in clinical studies. So you might do it in your laboratory, but actually when this scales up, you're going in lab, you're doing kind of in clinician. So you may have a nurse doing measurements, you might have a university hospital doing measurements. All that data has to get collected, aligned, cleaned up. And that has to get fed into your ML algorithm development cycle, get deployed and get tested and again. So this clinical data scale up for all of these sensors is a big driving force for that market. So it forces us to put a lot of energy into data collection and data processing tooling at really large scale, because some of these go into terabyte scale data collection. The other thing that we're seeing from a market that's got a lot of focus is this machine health area, predictive maintenance in particular. And there, the driving forces are kind of similar, right? In the sense that we've got a lot of machinery that has very specific types of failure modes or wear down modes, right? Maintenance modes that we want to look for. And those are expensive problems, right? When some of these machines break, they may be breaking on a $10 million per hour level of problem, right? Or a $100 million a day kind of problem when some of these pieces of machinery break. So these are typically high value assets in the way they're being used. And the data is very specific to those machines. It's very specific to those processes. Sometimes it's specific to a factory, right? And how they're doing this. So, and often we don't have a lot of failure data. So again, it's a data problem. But it's a little bit different in the healthcare space. The healthcare space where we're looking for clinical data ramp up. In machines and machine health, we're looking for how do we do what we call active learning. That's the piece of technology we've had to create to support that area. How do you start with very little data about the health of a machine that's not operating normally, right? So a machine and we often hear this from German manufacturers, our machines don't break. So we don't have any data on bad machines, right? All our machines are good machines. It's a German mentality of engineering. So we start with a very small amount of good data, right? The machine's operating normally. How do we go produce more data, right? And this is where active learning, on-device tuning even is really important for that market, because we're having to go out there and kind of help these customers instrument their machines to start with very simple algorithm, very little amount of data, and then slowly gather more data in an automated way. Gather data that shows wearing down, right? Gather data that shows failure modes. Automate the process of labeling. So we're doing things like auto labeling. That's really interesting. Exactly to support this type of use case. And new ways of doing anomaly detection. So we're actually just releasing several new classes of anomaly detection algorithms specifically for this, right? Developed for that market that helps us to instrument devices like this early on with very little data, and then slowly gather more valuable data set. And it's not about this. People get a bit too trendy with the technology. They get into like, well, it's got to be federated learning and on-device learning, and you don't need to send that data anywhere. And that's not true either. That data is valuable, right? You actually want to help customers build up their data sets, right? Because those data sets are golden.
Right.
So what we need is, how can we make it easier for these customers to build up their data sets so they understand what they can extract from those data sets and what kind of algorithms they can develop.
Data sets of how the machines that don't break actually break.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then the final kind of frontier in that space is personalization. So we're seeing a lot of that. Well, okay, we a lot of our customers want to create pretty generic things, like generic algorithms, because that's the data they have access to. Yet when this stuff gets deployed in the field, it gets very specific, right? Different factories will have different looking data coming out of the same machine. So enabling customers or their customers to personalize these ML algorithms, that's becoming a really interesting requirement and use case for us. And how do we enable that? And that's a big challenge too. Like we have a lot more to do in that space. Yeah. So those are the two things that are driving us: health of humans and the health of machines. Those are billion-dollar opportunities, each of them. There's a lot of work that to be done in those spaces. And I think the more specific we can get in as researchers, as startups doing pieces of technology, as more platform providers like EdgeImpulse, we need to get better and better at these kind of areas of application and talking about the kinds of technologies that people can really make use of and practically make use of.
Yeah. Well, let's turn towards some of the questions that have been coming in and see what we can do with them. And I encourage people to come up with more questions, but we've got a handful of questions here to start with. So Ram asks, how did you decide which vertical to go after? How many wrong choices did you make before you settled on the final one?
So part of, I think, the thing that helps us here is that we've done this before. So having been able to go and do a startup in this embedded industries before, I have some view on what these different vertical markets are like. So early on with EdgeImpulse, we had the luxury of kind of mapping out the types of industries we would like to be involved with. So things like industrial, we're really interested in, right? Logistics and supply chain, we're really interested in. Nature conservation is an area that we really care about and think is interesting. Health, we think is interesting. And areas that we didn't think were practical, like retail, we thought was way too high end for the technology, at least at the time. Autonomous driving, ADAS, way too high end, right? That's like a supercomputer on wheels. It's not really tinyML. So we could also just kind of say, like, these are things we're not going to do. So we ended up with a list of verticals that we thought were interesting early on without a lot of specifics. Then what we did, that was like year one. Year two, so EdgeImpulse is about getting on 3.5 years old now. Year two, what we did is a heat map. So we actually sat down with our head of solution engineering, and we did a list, an Excel sheet with all of the different use cases we've seen. Every single customer case, every single opportunity we've seen, kind of ones we saw but we didn't participate in, like all the data points we had. We made one big spreadsheet and we did a data analysis. We literally did hotspots with numbers, like how many of this type of vertical, how many of this type of like use case. Some use cases like keyword spotting across multiple verticals. And through that heat map, we came up with what we call our 5x5. So last year we had like this matrix of a few verticals with a few use cases that cross them. And this is our heat map that we were kind of looking out for. So that was last year. And that was still too much, right? Like that was 5x5 is a lot of stuff to work on. So we felt like our website was, all over the place. We had all these different use cases, some great customer examples in there, but it was just so much. It's hard for somebody in a specific industry to come in and see that, oh yeah, we do what they need, right? This year, we took that further and we did a business analysis. So this year we had enough data. We have enough of a pipeline with enough customer cases we've closed that we could go look at, all right, where is the value that customers are seeing and where do we see repeatable business, right? Where do we see business where, wow, we sold the same thing, right? In a predictable cycle. It took 2 months to close a deal, right? Not 6 to 18 months, which you oftentimes see in these industries, right? Yeah. And that was kind of our indication. That was very business driven. Like, where do we see repeatable deals that are of a reasonable size that use the same features from the product? And that's how we came with this human health and machine health. This two
and at least areas. for those applications, it's clear at that point that application has crossed the chasm. You're now
or is helping cross the chasm, right? It's got I'd call it's got chasm pull. Right? Yeah. It's like it can help cross the chasm. But I would say that this is a step-by-step process, right? Like we would not have been able to make this call 3 years ago. it would have been too early for us to have the data to understand that that's really where it's going. So we did it in an incremental way.
Yeah. Here's a question from Win. I'll try and paraphrase it into something that follows on from that. What happens very early when there's no use case yet, but you sense that there's an opportunity? How do you figure out, what are the opportunities? What are the defects that when you try to deploy tinyML commercially into those very new applications?
So I have two tools that I use. My kind of mental model is, one, you start with vision, purely, right? Like that is one of the things we have to do as startup founders. We've got to project a vision. And the vision is, right, how is the world going to change? Because of, well, not because of you even, just how is the world going to change? So for us with Edge Impulse, it was AI, right, in physical devices, in edge compute, is going to create massive value for real industries. And by real industries, we mean things like healthcare, logistics, industrial, right? Not just generic enterprise software, right? Real traditional industries, because those are kind of industries that we care about. We think are world changing. Space exploration, right? Super interesting. That was our vision. It didn't have anything to do with us yet. It's going to happen with or without us, right? And then you have to understand your mission, right? Early on, from day one, what is it that the role that you want to play? And the thing that we cared about with Edge Impulse, the reason we created the company, is we saw a big mismatch in the personas, right? We saw everybody in the kind of ML world working on tools for data scientists. Whereas we come from these traditional industries, we see the world in the lens of developers, system developers, engineers, scientists, right? The people who create the solutions and the systems, they're domain experts. We saw that in order to make machine learning successful and really change these industries, we have to democratize it for those people. So our role, our mission is really democratizing machine learning for the developers and engineers out there who are solving problems in real industries, right? Who have problems they have, right? They've got to detect this piece of analyte in your bloodstream, right? To solve a health problem. They need to detect how well you're sleeping. They need to understand when a machine's going to break based on its visual behavior, all kinds of things like that. That's the way that these engineers think, and we want to enable them to solve those problems. So we understood that the kind of that vision and mission, you've got to be able to take a leap of faith into how the world's going to change and what's your role. Now, on the flip side, the only way then to get real customer knowledge, right, is to go work with customers. So the other thing I'd say is that you just got to get out of your technology hole, get out there talking to people in industries relevant to your mission, right? Don't go off in other ways, like stay true to your mission and the vision you've got, but go talk to people. And that's how we developed that's how we got involved with digital health, is we actually just happened to meet some interesting people, some interesting founders in digital health companies. And we started talking with them, and we were really surprised by, wow, they've got some problems that we could help solve. We didn't even realize that beforehand. Like this clinical data life cycle I was talking about earlier, Chris, like we learned about that by going and working with a customer and just, taking a chance to start helping them out. You've got to just go out there and expose yourself to customers really early, even before you have a product ready. Go talk to customers, go test the water. When you have your product, like first release, put it in the hands of a customer if you can, as early as possible. Right. Get that feedback, because that is the real feedback loop you need. Don't wait until much later, because then you might be building something that nobody really needs. Maybe not for 5 years, right? And that's a problem.
Right. A couple more questions, if just slide them in here at the end. Bharat asks, it's a rather specific question, regarding Edge AI, how do edge optimized hardware platforms like Jetson development kits affect the growth of tinyML based solutions?
In a big way. So I don't see tinyML as being separated from Edge ML more broadly, right? I see it as an entire spectrum of technology. We've got tinyML here on the very efficient side. And for me, tinyML applies to low-end CPUs as well, on the Cortex-A side, for example. And growing all the way up into things like Jetsons and beyond that. It's one spectrum of technology. accelerated hardware platforms are opening up a lot of, let's say, industry confidence, and this is what we need. People see that we've got Jetsons out there. They're quite affordable. They're high power, high performance. You can get them and deploy most workloads, right? And it will probably be enough resources for that. Well, now we're seeing accelerators through the whole rest of the stack, right? We see specialized Cortex-A accelerators. We see specialized Cortex-M accelerators. We're seeing RISC-V architectures with new kinds of vector optimizations that are really interesting. We're seeing just talking to a company that does low power GPUs, really interesting. So GPUs for wearable types devices, and how can you use that for machine learning? DSPs, so things like Chris, you know very well, high five type DSPs, right? High five DSPs, like you can do amazing things also with machine learning, right, with a DSP. So all of these accelerators are helping customers adopt the technology. And I think that's a really key thing for us, is that they see that the hardware can handle the workloads. Let's go do them.
Yeah. Well, I think that we've reached the top of the hour. There are a couple more questions. We'll make sure you get a look at these questions so that you can respond if you like. But I want to thank you very much. This has been great. This has really been outstanding. And with that, I'll pass the baton back to Evgeny.
Thank you, Chris. Super enjoyable.
I think it's been really an amazing conversation. Truly enjoyed it. Before we conclude, I have my favorite question, Zach. And since we are running out of time, maybe you can answer it in one word or one sentence. You're a very successful guy. You've done a lot of cool things in your professional life. I think you have more to come. What is success for you?
Working on the meaningful thing in the way you like to work on it, I think is the key thing. Working on something you care about and being able to use your time in a way that you care about, right? Impact and time, really, that's the most thing. The thing you get out of success more than anything else is the ability to go do those two things.
So basically do meaningful things and do what you like and love what you do.
And do it in a flexible way, right? Do it when you really want to be doing it. Spend time with your family and the time that you want to be spending time with your family. Keep yourself healthy. Go surfing, right? In the time that you need to be staying healthy. So there's I think a really important thing about having impact, but then having your time to use as you want. And that's the magical combination. It's not about money or power. That I don't think that really brings joy or success in a way. Success really is about being able to have an impact as an engineer or an entrepreneur or in whatever you do, and having your time to use to be impactful and have a good life, right? So that's the ultimate goal.
Well, definitely you are a role model with doing surfing and making an impact all over the world with Agent Pulse and your previous ventures. Congratulations, Zach, and thank you for joining us again today.
Thanks, Evgeny.
Yeah, and just at the end, let me acknowledge our sponsors again. So this is Strategic Partners, ARM, Executive, Agent Pulse, is tinyML executive sponsor, Qualcomm, Sentient, and the platinum sponsors are DeepLight, ClickerTech, Reality AI, Renaissance, Sony, and gold sponsors Analog Devices, PhotoHub, Latin AI, Microsoft, NXP, Sense. Oh, this is Seed Studio, SenseML, ST Microelectronics, Synaptics, Synsense, and also the silver sponsors. And thank you again for joining, and we'll see you in a month at the October edition of tinyML Success Stories, and there will be a lot of interesting events happening in tinyML world. Next week, Imagine by Agent Pulse, as Zach mentioned, and then we have a lot of tinyML activities, Europe, Middle East, Africa, Asia in November, Summit, tinyML for Good, a lot of cool things. So stay tuned. Thank you.